Well, I will get my slide deck up and we will get started for tonight. I am so excited to have you all here tonight. I just want to say a huge thank you for taking a Thursday evening to spend with us here at New Hampshire Audubon. Tonight's webinar is all about getting ready for the 2026 Backyard Winter Bird Survey. And as you can see from the many participants joining us, there's a huge diversity of people here tonight from towns all across the state, which is really exciting to see. And what else is exciting is that we have some first timers tonight and we have some long-time participants. There's a little bit of everyone, which is great. If you don't know me yet, my name is Grace McCulloch. I'm the Community Science Project Leader here at New Hampshire Audubon, and I'll be walking you through the Backyard Winter Bird Survey tonight. I'm also joined by the lovely Zoe Dawson, our digital media coordinator. She will be handling your questions and be an extra resource for me if I run into any technical problems tonight. We will run for about an hour tonight with some time for questions at the end of tonight's presentation. Before we dive into the Backyard Winter Bird Survey, I want to make a few housekeeping notes. We ask that you stay muted throughout tonight's webinar. We also want to point your attention to the chat. You guys have already been great at using the chat tonight. Tonight, we're really going to use the chat as a way to talk to each other and to answer questions. I love for this to be an interactive webinar, and I will be quizzing you a lot on the different bird species we'll see in tonight's program. So use the chat to answer those kind of questions. We will save the Q&A for any questions that you have about the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. Feel free to put those in the Q&A. That's where Zoe will be monitoring. And there's also the option in the Q&A to upvote someone else's question, which is great because then we don't have a ton of people asking the same question and you can say, oh, I really want to know the answer to that question too. So feel free to upvote those and we will hold questions until the end of tonight's presentation. I know that most of you are already familiar with New Hampshire Audubon, but just in case this is your first time interacting with us, I just wanted to give a quick introduction to our amazing organization. New Hampshire Audubon is a state-based environmental nonprofit organization, and we're actually completely independent from National Audubon. We work directly in New Hampshire communities, and our mission is to protect New Hampshire's natural environment for both wildlife and people. And to do that, we have really 4 programmatic pillars that help us achieve our mission. The first one is environmental education. We have an amazing education department that does nature day camps for students, has a ton of awesome public programs, and free bird outings. The second area that we work in is policy. We have a great policy team that works on advocating for sound environmental policy here in New Hampshire and beyond. We also focus our work on land stewardship. We manage about 10,000 acres of wildlife habitat throughout New Hampshire on 40 different wildlife sanctuaries throughout the state. And then last but not least, conservation science. That's the team that I'm a part of. We have biologists who focus on everything from peregrine falcons, which you can see in this picture, which is absolutely adorable, to monarch butterflies, to, like we'll talk tonight, the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. So we really have a great team of folks here at New Hampshire Audubon and cover a huge variety of areas in the conservation and environmental education field. If you're interested in learning more about our organization, I encourage you to check out our website. Okay, so the Backyard Winter Bird Survey, the reason you're all here tonight. At its core, this project is really about fun and collecting some really great data. It's really designed to be easy and is a great way to get into birding here in New Hampshire. And the project is really simple. We ask participants to count the birds in their backyards over the survey weekend and report what they're seeing to us. There's a little more detail to it, which we'll get into tonight, but that's at the heart of it. Reporting birds that you're seeing in your backyard. And for a lot of us, that's something that we're doing all the time anyway, watching the birds in our backyard. And this is just taking that extra step of contributing your data to really meaningful local science. And the great thing is that it has a huge impact. We're able to look at data all across the state and get a really good picture of what's happening with our backyard winter birds. So I just want to start by saying a huge thank you for joining us tonight. This kind of research wouldn't be possible without volunteers like you. I want to show a little bit of history of this project first, just to get you thinking. Feel free to put in the chat if you've seen either of these two bird species in your backyard this winter. I know that I have seen both of these, and I'm seeing quite a few comments that say both many. Great, very common. Okay, so I have a lot in my backyard too, but you may believe it or not, these species were actually not in New Hampshire several decades ago. There was a time when we would not see a tufted titmouse or a northern cardinal. And when I first heard that, I was shocked because they are literally everywhere now. The arrival of these two species in New Hampshire is what really started the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. The project started in 1967, and it was called the Cardinal and Tufted Titmouse Survey. And at the time, both of those species were very rare in New Hampshire. New Hampshire Audubon biologists wanted a way to crowdsource data to understand where these birds were in the state. And you have to remember that in 1967, this was way before the internet. Data sheets of records of these birds were mailed in. And so for its time, collecting this huge amount of data was pretty revolutionary in the birding world. Who recognizes this species? Feel free to put in the chat what this bird is. Oh, it is a little bit of a trickier one, but any guesses? Oh, perfect. First guess. Northern Mockingbird by Sharon Grader. Yes. So this is a northern mockingbird. This is another species um, that had a range expansion into the states shortly after the survey started in 1967. Um, a couple years after the survey started, they added this species and mourning doves to the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. It wasn't until 1987 that it became the count that we all know today, a count of all the backyard birds in New Hampshire. And ever since then, we've counted all species that are seen in backyards across the state. The survey always happens on the second full weekend in February. And with 38 years of consistent data, it's one of the largest systematic data sets for winter bird trends that we have here in New Hampshire, which is pretty remarkable. So in tonight's webinar, we're going to learn a few things. First, we're going to talk about how to participate in the survey. We're going to go through some ID tips for our common backyard winter birds. We'll talk about how to submit your data with our new online form. And we'll also wrap up the night looking at some of the data trends that we see and some of the stories that we can tell with the data collected during the survey. I'll also be highlighting tonight our brand new project website. This is something we're very excited to roll out this year. It doesn't just include data entry, it also includes some amazing, never seen before resources and analyses from the data set. So I'll show that in a little bit. I want to just recognize that participation has really grown over time in the survey. Last year, we had nearly 2,000 people take part, and we would love to see that number grow. And you can tell from this graph, it just keeps growing. This is such a fun project that a lot of our folks will share it with their neighbors, with their family, with their friends. So it's really a community event. And if you have friends or family that you want to share it with, please send them the information. We would love for them to join too. We have participation all over New Hampshire. And you can see from this figure that it is highest in our southern and coastal counties and lowest in the North Country, which kind of reflects the distribution of people in the state. But if you live in one of those blue counties on the map, we especially need you this year. So please participate and get your friends to too. To give you a flavor of the kind of birds that we see on the Backyard Winter Bird Survey, I thought I'd give you a peek at the most common birds we had last year. I'm going to show the top 5 species from last year. And while I do that, please put in the chat your guess for the top species last year. So the most common backyard winter bird last year. You might be surprised by the answer. Coming in at number 5, we have the blue jay with just over 7,000 blue jays counted. I see a guess for the dove. That's really good. Coming in at number 4, we have mourning doves. A lot of people don't tend to think of them at feeders, but we have a lot of them at bird feeders in the winter, especially below them. Coming in at number 3, a lot of people guess chickadee. Chickadees are pretty strong and they're always typically in the top 5. Coming in at number 2, American goldfinch. I see a few guesses for that species. And then I've seen at least a couple for our top bird, the dark-eyed junco. Last year, observers reported 10,490 dark-eyed juncos, which is pretty incredible. This is just the top 5 species. Last year, we had 78 different bird species reported on the survey. So there's always something new to see in your backyard. Another lovely thing about the survey is its accessibility. It's a great thing to do with the whole family, and it's also a great thing to do during cold weather. You are, of course, welcome to stand outside and watch the birds, but if you're like me, I recommend sitting in a comfy chair by the window and watching them that way. Coffee's always optional, but that's how I do it. You can watch for the whole weekend, 24/7 if you really want to, or you can just watch 15 minutes. Either way, your data is really valuable for us. So how does it work? The survey is really designed to be simple. As I mentioned, watch as little or as long as you like. The most important thing is that you only report the birds you see on February 14th and 15th. I know it's hard because we all see a really cool bird the week before the survey, and then of course it doesn't show up. But in order to maintain a level of data quality control, we ask that you only report the birds you see during the weekend. And this allows for a snapshot of winter birds during that specific time period. And you can submit your data online, which I'll show you in a little bit, or if you can't submit your data online, you're also welcome to mail us a paper form, which is available on our website. When counting the birds, we ask that you record the maximum number of each species seen at one time. This is a little bit different, and I'll give you an example of how this works. If you see 2 chickadees at 9 a.m. on Saturday, and then at 11 a.m. you see 3 chickadees, and then say on Sunday morning you see 1, the maximum number that you would report is the 3 chickadees that you saw at one time. And this method isn't meant to give us an exact population count, but it's all about tracking relative changes over time. So if everyone counts the same way, we can see long-term trends. So that's just one thing I'd like to point out. You're going to count the maximum that you can see at one time. And that's helpful because sometimes feeders are crazy, like the one on the right, and there's a ton of birds flying in and out. And so it'll be very difficult to accurately count them all or get an accurate population census. So we just ask maximum at one time. And another thing to note is that any bird you can reasonably see from your house counts. So say you see a bald eagle flying above your yard, even if it doesn't land in your yard, you can still count it on the backyard winter bird survey. You also don't need a bird feeder to participate. That's one thing that a lot of people worry about. You know, I don't have a bird feeder. That's okay. As long as you can see birds, you can report them. The other thing I'll just note here is that sometimes people say, even if they have a bird feeder out, they have a dull day and they don't have any birds, unfortunately. Now, I hope that doesn't happen to any of our listeners tonight, but if it does, I would encourage you to please still report that. No birds is still really valuable data to us, and we want to know if you're not seeing any birds in your backyard. So while it can be disappointing, please still fill out the survey form. And the survey isn't just about birds. We also count squirrels, and new last year, we count chipmunks as well. Last year, we had 104 chipmunks reported, which is pretty incredible. I'm not expecting as many this year because we have such deep snow and it's been so cold. But it remains to be seen. So if you see a chipmunk out there, please report it. And I love this photo. This is a gray squirrel with a genetic mutation, and so he appears black. And Alan sends us a photo every year, which makes me so happy. Um, we ask that folks only report the birds they can confidently identify. This isn't to be discouraging. This is just, again, for the quality of our data. And the great thing is that there are lots of resources out there to help you, even if this is your first time identifying a backyard bird. We have a great guide on our website to common winter birds. These are the top 30 birds that are most commonly reported. We also have web pages that give ID tips. And then there are also great resources outside of our website. I would encourage everyone to check out the Merlin Bird ID app. This is a great free app that you could download, and it has beautiful images of all the birds, in addition to photo and sound ID help. The great thing is it can also give you a list of birds expected in your area, which can help you whittle down what that bird might be you're having trouble identifying. And then if you are still stumped, you can always submit a photo. I'll show you how to do that later in tonight's webinar, to myself and our team of volunteer naturalists, and we will identify the bird for you. And I'll give you an example of this here. Even if the photo is quote unquote bad, photos can still be really helpful, in identification. And typically we can work out what the bird is, from even a bad photo. So don't shy away from submitting a bad quote unquote photo. Does anyone have any guesses what bird this is in the photo on the slide? Feel free to put it in the chat. Okay, so you have a guess for a red-tailed hawk. Another guess for a hawk. Okay, we have one from Janet Owl, Caroline Owl. So this bird is actually a barred owl. And here's a better photo of the birds. We do, of course, have owls on the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. Often people don't see them, they're hearing them. But even if you hear an owl, you can still report it. So, lesson learned, a bad photo is still very helpful. And it is actually really great if you see a rare bird. We require a higher level of documentation for really rare birds, and so sending in photos is always helpful. Okay, so it's okay if you're not an expert birder. In fact, we don't need you to be to participate. We're all going to be learning together, and in that spirit, I thought I'd share a few tips that have helped me when I started to learn to identify birds. And my first big tip is to learn the usual suspects. The great thing about birding is in winter is that there are less birds around. So if you learn the top 20 or so, you're going to know most of the birds you'll see in your backyard. And many of them are quite distinct looking, like this black-capped chickadee. So looking at our guide to common winter birds, can be a great way to learn the basics and prepare for the survey. My second piece of advice is to think about the size of the bird you're trying to identify. Cornell Lab of Ornithology uses this really nice range. So think about whether the bird is the size of a sparrow, a robin, or a goose. And this sounds kind of silly, but you'd be surprised by how quickly it can help narrow down your possibilities to a few species. I also like to think a lot about the bill shape. So is the bill really long and pointy, indicating a woodpecker? Or is it short and fat, kind of like a finch? And then my third piece of advice is to not get too overwhelmed with immediately narrowing down an individual to species. First, think about what bird group it might belong to. Is it a small brown bird? Great, you've already narrowed it down to sparrows, and then you can look at your guide and see what sparrows are common in your area. So using the steps can sometimes help avoid the anxiety you might feel when starting to identify birds, and breaking ID down into pieces can be really helpful. Another thing I like to remind people of is that males and females of the same species can look very different. We all know the bright red northern cardinal, but don't forget that the female looks different. On this slide, we have the female northern cardinal. It's also important to remember that a bird's winter plumage can look very different from its summer. You might be used to a bright male American goldfinch in the summer, but in the winter they're far more dull and kind of less dramatic in their plumage. So pay attention to that too. And now my favorite topic, the commonly confused birds. There are some cases where we often see confusion on the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. And to help address this, we have a guide on our website to commonly confused birds. Um, and I encourage you to check it out. I'm going to run through a few of them just so you have an idea tonight. Here are two of our most commonly confused woodpeckers. Feel free to put in the chat with the species and number on the side. So put your guess for number one and your guess for number two into the chat. Okay, I'm seeing Harry versus Downy. Okay, I'm seeing one Downy, two Harry. Oh my gosh, you guys are great. So yeah, as most of you are right, number one is our Downy woodpecker, and number two is our Hairy woodpecker. Now, if you had these both side by side, it'd be very easy to tell them apart. The downy woodpecker would be really small, and the hairy woodpecker would be much bigger. Unfortunately, they quite often do not cooperate in that way, so you will have to tell them apart separately. My favorite way to tell them apart is to look at the length of the bill relative to the head. So on the downy woodpecker, the bill is relatively short compared to the head, much shorter than the length of the head. Whereas for the hairy woodpecker, the bill is quite long, almost as long as the bird's head. So keep that in mind when you see a possible hairy downy woodpecker. Okay, now on to more challenging territory. Each year we have multiple reports of a quote unquote red-headed woodpecker. All three birds on the slide have red heads, but only one is a red-headed woodpecker. And that bird, I'm seeing one. Oh, great. You guys got ahead of me. That bird is the one on the far left. That's the red-headed woodpecker. Um, Red-headed woodpeckers are actually extremely rare in the state, with only a few verified reports each year. So if you think you have a red-headed woodpecker, I would love to see a photo of it. And I'd encourage you to take a second look. Quite often, when people report a red-headed woodpecker, they mean one of the two other species on the slide. Our pileated woodpecker, which is our largest woodpecker with a bright red crest, or our red-bellied woodpecker, which, despite its name, often doesn't have a red belly, but does often have a red does have a red head. The one in the photo is a female. It has red on the back of the neck, but not on the top. In the male, the red band would continue all the way to the bill. And this red-bellied woodpecker has a nice checkerboard kind of back. So just remember that just because the head is red doesn't actually mean it's a red-headed woodpecker. It's unfortunate about the names, but I can't change that. Okay, now to my favorite commonly confused bird. Please put your guess in the chat for number one and number two. I'm seeing a few guesses. One has finch, two purple finch. Great. You guys are awesome. So number one is our male house finch, and number two is our male purple finch. These two finches trip up the best of us, and the purple finch is actually the state bird, but for most of the state, the house finch is actually the more common species, which just confuses things even more. But here's a little bit of advice for telling them apart. The male house finch, I like to think of as fire engine red on the head, breast, and rump, but they have brown on much of their back. Whereas the male purple finch appears almost like it's been dipped in raspberry juice, the whole bird. House finches have a mostly squared off tail. Well, you can see on the side this really deeply notched V of the purple finch's tail. Purple finches are more common north of the White Mountains, whereas house finches are most common south. And if you live in central or southern New Hampshire, you have to be really careful because both species are found here. Okay, so it's not just the males that are confusing. The females are too. But if you look really closely at the female purple finch, you'll see that it has this nice white stripe above the eye. And that's the key feature that I like to really clue into. That white stripe above the eye, that's very pronounced, is the female purple finch. Okay. So, if on the survey you don't know what a species of bird is, you can always report the category. And this can be helpful for some tricky species like sparrows or hawks. It's better to err on the side of caution. So, you're welcome to report hawk species or sparrow species, and then write a great description about the key field marks. And we might be able to help you ID the bird based on your description. We also welcome comments, and they can be really helpful. Um, if you're unsure about a species, your notes can help us see what you saw. And they're also really helpful for documenting rare birds or a bird that moved too fast and you couldn't get a photo of. And so on the side, we have a great example of a really helpful comment that gets into the key field marks and maybe a little bit of the behavior as well. Unfortunately, some comments are less helpful. Um, I saw it can't help us confirm the presence of a rare bird. And often in really rare species cases, photos can be invaluable and are sometimes required for very rare birds. Okay, so we've learned how to participate. We've learned a little bit more about bird ID, and now we're going to switch gears and go to the new website to explore how to submit our data, and I'll show you some of the new exciting features too. So bear with me as I just switch screens and share the website with you guys. Okay, so we will go to the website. Let me know. Okay, I'm seeing it's appearing. That's great. Okay, so this is our new Backyard Winter Bird Survey website that just got released in January. We're very excited to showcase it tonight, and I encourage you all to check it out too after tonight's webinar. I'll scroll down on the homepage just to say that we're 8 days away, 5 hours, 1 minute, and 50 seconds for the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. Getting closer every second, apparently. But it's coming up fast, so I'm excited you're here tonight. So get ready. So, what I want to first put your attention to is the how to participate section. If you have any questions about how to participate in the survey, this is your place to find the answers. We have answers to our most frequent questions. We have right here a button to share your photos. So this is where you submit your photos from the Backyard Winter Bird Survey with, and we get to see all the great things that were in your backyard. And then I'll draw your attention to the bottom where we have additional resources. This is where you'll find that guide to common winter birds. You can download it here. You'll also find our commonly confused winter bird guide. And this is where I'll be posting our recorded webinar at the end of tonight's session. So we'll scroll back up to the top. The most important thing is the Submit Your Data tab. There are a couple options for submitting your data. I recommend most people submit their data online. It's really easy and it allows us to process the results quicker. We also have a mail-in option if you're unable to submit your data online. But this sheet is also really useful for other reasons. A lot of people like to have a scrap piece of paper right by where they're watching the birds to kind of keep a list of what they're seeing over the weekend and then submit their data online. And so some people print this data sheet, keep notes of what they're seeing, and then they translate it to our online form for easy submission. I'll click the form just to show you what it looks like. If you participated online last year, it's very similar. And it's very similar to most online forms you've probably encountered. Has a little bit about the instructions. And then we collect data on who's counting the birds, where you're watching the birds, what days you counted, the number of hours that you watched for. And then you'll see this next button. And the form has about 4 different pages. And once you hit the next, a list of common species will appear, and you can type in the counts or the maximum counts for each of those species. If you have any questions at all with the form, I'll share my email at the end of tonight's session and feel free to reach out. But I promise it's very easy to complete and should only take about 5 to 10 minutes. While we're on the website, I'll show you a couple more features. We have here on our recent results tab our 2025 report. So our report from last year. And our senior biologist, Pamela Hunt, wrote this report. If you want to see what was seen last year, check it out. She always writes a quite entertaining report. I also enjoy this tab. This is new for us. We have a tab about how to help winter birds and how to create a backyard that really supports wildlife during the winter. And so we have some great advice on this portion of the website to make your backyard an oasis for winter wildlife. We also have a fun photo gallery. So if you send us photos from the survey, you might be posted here. And I encourage you to check it out. There's lots of really fun photos from last year's survey. Okay, the last thing I will show you before we go back to the presentation is our Explore the Data tab. This has been a bit of a passion project for me. For 20 of our most common backyard winter bird species, we have made species profiles. We've done in-depth analyses on the data that has been collected as part of the Backyard Winter Bird Survey for each of the species. We've provided some fun facts and natural history information, and we've also provided some feeding advice and identification tips. I'll give you a sneak peek at what one of those looks like, and you can always come back to this website to explore them all. This is our profile for the eastern bluebird. We see that they're increasing over time. You can read a cute story about how eastern bluebird populations have changed over time in the state. You can get feeding tips on what bird food is best to attract this species. You can get some advice about how to improve your backyard to attract the species or where you're most likely to find them. And then we have identification tips there as well. So there's a lot to explore on the new website, and I encourage you all to check it out and to submit your data from the website too. So what I'm going to do is go back to our PowerPoint, and we are going to do just that. We're going to dive a little bit into the data from this amazing project. So we have 38 years of data for most of our species. And yes, that data can be a little bit noisy. Participatory science always is a little bit noisy just because there are differences in observer skill and many other factors. But that said, many of our trends match patterns seen in large scale surveys like the Christmas bird count and eBird, which makes our data set really remarkably robust and is exciting to see. Oh, I love the fact that, okay, hold on. We'll stop sharing just a sec. We'll get on the right page. Great. Okay, now we're on cooking with oil. I think we're on the right page and you don't have to look at all my ugly notes. Okay, so yeah, as I was saying, this is a great data set. And it really does compare to some of the other projects that are being done in the area. And it's kind of exciting to see that our trends match those in other large participatory science projects. So what we're going to do tonight is I will flash a bird up on the screen, and then I will show you the data that we have for that species. This one is an easy one. We just shared this on the website, but feel free to practice and put in the chat what species this is. We'll start easy. Okay, great. Eastern bluebird. This is our eastern bluebird, a favorite of mine and many of our participants. Um, so here we have a graph of the data for eastern bluebird. As you get used to this graph, you'll see that the y-axis shows bluebirds per observer or count per observer. You'll see that there are half birds on this axis That doesn't mean that we're seeing half of a bird out there. It's just that our counts are adjusted for the number of observers over time. Last year, we had a record number of participants, and we wouldn't want that to skew our understanding of how our winter birds are doing. So we do this adjustment. Um, Eastern bluebirds have a really cool story here in New Hampshire. When the survey began, there were almost no bluebirds in the state that overwintered. They were actually considered a sign of spring, but since the early 2000s, they've become much more common. And there are a couple of possible reasons for that. Um, Warmer winters have perhaps provided better conditions for them to persist during the winter. There's also likely more food on the landscape for these birds in particular. Landscaping practices have really lent um, to more fruiting and berry producing trees that often have their berries long into the winter, and eastern bluebirds love fruit. Okay, does anyone know what this bird is? Feel free to put it in the chat. Yeah, it's a robin. You guys are doing great. This is another bird that used to be considered a sign of spring, but now is found throughout the winter, except parts of Coas County and the White Mountains. And like eastern bluebirds, the causes are pretty similar. Likely warmer winters and more food. They also love the persistent fruit on trees, and you can see that in this photo. Okay, who knows what this one is? Feel free to put it in the chat. Great. I'm seeing some red-bellied woodpeckers. I'm so happy no one reported a red-headed woodpecker. This is great. Naming issues aside, this is a really cool bird. They are a very recent arrival to the state. You can see that in this graph. They were actually rare before the 2000s, but are now common across the state south of the White Mountains. Um, we're not exactly sure why this species from the south has moved north into New Hampshire, but there are a couple possibilities. We do have more forest cover in New Hampshire than we did during the agricultural boom. And there's also a theory that the Dutch elm disease, which killed a lot of our larger trees, perhaps created more nesting habitat for red-bellied woodpeckers and helped facilitate their range expansion northward. Either way, there's a lot more out there than there used to be. Okay, you might laugh at me, but what feeder bird is this? Yeah, this is the wild turkey. I don't think many people think of them as feeder birds, but a lot of people see them underneath their feeders. Um, you might not know, though, that turkeys were actually locally extinct in New Hampshire due to overhunting decades ago. There were several attempts to reintroduce them. In 1969, there was an attempt to reintroduce them in the Pawtuckaway area, but that failed due to a harsh winter. But the second attempt in the Connecticut River Valley was really successful, and that was in 1975. And I think we all know how successful it was. I can see 20 turkeys in a backyard in one day, and it's been really remarkable. By the 1990s, their population exploded. You can see that on this figure, and they're now found in every town in the state. Um, you can see that there's some variability though, and you can see in 2024 their numbers dipped quite dramatically. That was actually due to a wet and cold summer, which led to low recruitment in the population, with a lot of chicks not making it. And this is data that we saw in the New Hampshire Fish and Game brood data too. But they're on the rebound, and I expect them to recover. Okay, now for the real test. Feel free to put in the chat which bird this one is. House finch. Yep, this is a house finch. Um, House finches have a pretty cool story on the East Coast. All of our house finches actually descended from a handful of birds that were released at a Long Island airport in the 1940s. Pretty crazy. Um, their population boomed, and you can see that with this really dramatic spike in the data. And they continued to increase until conjunctivitis arrived on scene. And the conjunctivitis really hit this species hard, wiping out large numbers of house finches. They've since started to recover and seem to be fairly stable. But conjunctivitis, I'll just note, is still something that's present in wild bird populations. And the key signs for conjunctivitis are like swollen and crusty eyes. So I'd encourage you just to keep an eye out. If you see swollen or crusty eyes, we always recommend that folks take their feeders in, that they wash them thoroughly with a 1 part bleach, 9 parts water solution, and then that they wait 2 weeks before putting them back up. We just want to make sure that we're not spreading any disease and that we're protecting our birds. It's always recommended that you clean your feeder, and it's part of some good practice to avoid these kind of things. Okay, who knows what this species is? This one's a little harder. Okay, Nancy with the red paw. That's great. This is a red poll. It used to be considered two different species, the common red poll and the hoary red poll. But last year they were lumped by the American Ornithological Society. Either way, they are pretty cool winter finch. You can see that they have pretty dramatic fluctuations. We call this a biennial cycle, where they show up big 1 year and then they almost vanish the next year. These are eruptions that happen when spruce and birch seed crops fail in Canada. And then the species comes down to New Hampshire and New England in search of food. You can see a fairly consistent pattern, but you can also see some things that aren't explained, like we haven't had that many in recent years. And it remains to be seen whether they'll pick up the pattern that they had in the past. Does anyone know what this species is? This is one that we are talking a lot about this year. Oh, great. Evening grosbeak. Yes. This is the evening grosbeak. They have a pretty cool story in the state. They are a little bit trickier on the ID, and I saw some goldfinches, and I wouldn't feel bad. They are commonly confused for goldfinches. Um, 40 years ago, if you had a feeder, you might have 20 of these at your feeder, but they've really declined since. Evening grosbeak numbers peaked in the 1950s to 1990s during a spruce bloodworm outbreak in Canada. Basically, there was a lot of food for this species, and there was a lot of reproduction happening and then huge population growth. But when that outbreak ended, the food supplies dropped, and so did the grosbeak numbers. Um, there has been another budworm outbreak. This began in the early 2000s, and we're starting to see a little bit of an uptick again, with peaks happening every other year. But it really remains to be seen if they'll increase to their numbers that they previously held. They're listed as vulnerable by the IUCN, and there's actually a whole network of researchers who are studying evening grosbeaks and their decline. And Zoe will put for you in the chat a link for more information about the Finch Research Network. They're a great resource to learn more about this bird. There have been predictions that we'll see an eruption of evening grosbeaks this year. So I would just encourage everyone to be on the lookout because I would love to see and hear about evening grosbeaks in places where they aren't typically. Okay, who knows what this species is? Oh my gosh, and I just saw that Sharon had 24 evening grosbeaks yesterday. That's awesome. Okay, we have a lot of red-breasted nuthatches, which is perfect. This is our friend, the red-breasted nuthatch. I think they are adorable. And they have a pretty funky graph. They're fairly consistent over time, but then they have these two dramatic peaks. And if you're around in 2021, you probably saw tons of them in your backyard. Um, Again, these fluctuations are due to food availability year to year. This is a species that typically comes south during the winter. There's not a lot of food up in Canada. Um, and our senior biologist, Pamela Hunt, has predicted an eruption of red-breasted nuthatches this year. I saw one in my backyard this morning, so knock on wood. But if you see one of these, please report it so it can be counted in the survey. Okay, what about this bird? Feel free to put your answer in the chat. Okay, I'm seeing a lot of wrens, Carolina wren. Great. This is a Carolina wren. Like the red-breasted woodpecker, we have a red-bellied woodpecker, excuse me. We have seen a huge increase in this species. It's another one of our range expansion species. So they used to not be in New Hampshire and they're moving further north. They can stay throughout the winter, though they are susceptible to really cold winters. Um, and you can see last year we had a record high of Carolina wren. It felt like everyone was calling me about their Carolina wren in their backyard. And I'm expecting the same this year, though we'll see because of the snow. So another bird that's had a really dramatic success story here in New Hampshire. So what I'm showing you now is a different kind of figure that also represents the data. I want to give a sneak peek at the trend analyses that are featured on our new website. I won't overwhelm you with all of them, but I want to give you a sneak peek for this one. Over the past year, we've analyzed long-term trend data for the Backyard Winter Bird Survey, and this is really giving us a great understanding of overall population trends. In this figure, we have the same dots as the last graph, and those represent the average number of Carolina wrens per observer each year. The purple line, though, is new, and that shows the overall trend for Carolina wrens based on a statistical analysis for the whole survey window. And this trend line allows us to estimate percent change over time in the population, accounting for the year-to-year variation. And for Carolina wrens, the results are really striking. Our analyses show an average 13% increase per year in birds per observer. That's remarkable growth for Carolina wrens and kind of helps explain why everyone keeps seeing them in their backyards. If you're interested in exploring more kind of graphs like this and digging into the details behind the analyses, you can find that info on our website. I'll show you one more analysis just for our friends the black-capped chickadees. Um, the points can look kind of noisy, but when you look at the statistical trend, we actually saw that there's been a 2% per year decline in the number of black-capped chickadees reported. In 2024, we had our lowest count ever. For me, this really underscores the value of the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. If we're not paying attention, we're not going to pick up on these kind of trends over time. And that's one of the things that I'm so grateful to for our volunteers. They're really out there helping us understand what's happening with our bird populations. And before you can take action, you have to know what's happening. And so this is a great example of showcasing a species where we see them every day. We might not realize that they're declining during the winter, but the data really shows it. And this decline is seen in other data sets as well. You can read the species profile for black-capped chickadee on our website, and that gives a lot more information about some of the theories as to why we're seeing less on the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. But it's a good reminder that even our common birds can be at risk, and every bird counts on the survey. Okay, we're going to wrap up with a fun bird tonight. Who knows what this species is? Feel free to put your answer in the chat. It's a bird that we do not typically see in New Hampshire in the winter. Last year, we had a record number reported. We had 13 of these, and we had 12 the previous year. Okay, I see Colin guessed a warbler, and we have Elsa with a pine warbler. Congratulations, yes. This is a pine warbler. It is not supposed to be here in the winter, but as we see warmer winters, we are seeing some of these individuals, like pine warblers, staying throughout the winter. Warmer conditions can allow these birds to stay, and often we find them at people's bird feeders because there's a ton of food there. So you never know what you're going to find on the Backyard Winter Bird Survey. And again, if you see a rare bird, please take a photo of it and send it in. We would love to see it. As we wrap up tonight, I just want to give a big thank you. The Backyard Winter Bird Survey would not be possible without the participation of all the many backyard birders over the survey weekends. This project is also supported by many donations. And so I just want to give a big thanks to our donors as well who have supported the continuation of this program. You are welcome to donate to support the Backyard Winter Bird Survey, but you don't need to donate to participate. We are just excited to have you share the birds in your backyard with us. Zoe will put a link to our donation page in the chat if you'd like to. And then I just want to say, don't forget, February 14th and 15th is the weekend for the survey. I keep saying Valentine's Day weekend because that's helping me remember. Um, and yeah, show your love for birds. What better way to celebrate Valentine's Day than counting birds in your backyard? I have my email address on the slide, and I also have the email address for our Backyard Winter Bird Survey specific email account. Feel free to reach out to folks if you have any questions. And I believe we're on time and we have some time for questions tonight. What Zoe's going to do is take a look in the question and answer and just give me some questions and I'd love to answer them. If you need to log off early, don't worry, we'll be sending a recording of tonight's webinar. And if your question doesn't get answered, just shoot me an email and I'd be happy to answer it for you.
I'll start out with one question that's pretty simple. A couple of people actually asked if they need to identify male versus female when they submit their survey data.
Oh, great question. For the purposes of this project, you don't need to distinguish between male and female. Yeah, so just give us a combined total.
And then also having to do with the combined totals, we've had a few people ask to go over how to do the numbers again. And
Mhm.
then also as an example, someone said if they saw a blue jay on the 14th and the 15th, do they just submit one?
Yeah, great. So we ask that people submit one survey for the whole weekend. So if you bird on both days of the weekend, just submit one survey. So in that math problem, you'd just be submitting one blue jay. And it's really just the max that you see at one time. So again, like if you see 3 chickadees in the morning and you see 5 in the afternoon, you're not going to report 8. You wouldn't combine them. You would just report the max, which would be 5. Yeah, and if you have trouble remembering it, don't worry. We have info on our website, and I put a note on the actual survey form too to remind folks.
And we had another question, someone asking if they can use their bird feeder with a camera.
Yeah, you are welcome to use your bird feeder with a camera. The only caution I would give is that sometimes the camera can mis-ID the bird. So just take a second look at the ID that it gives you on the camera. Yeah.
And then someone just asked that they can often hear a certain bird but can rarely see it. What should they do in that case?
Yeah, so as long as you're really confident on the sound ID, you can report that bird. A great example of that is hearing barred owls in the evening. They're starting to call in February, but you're not that likely to see them. So as long as you're confident on the sound ID, you're welcome to report it.
We have someone asking if they participate both days, do they do separate surveys?
Great, that's such a good question. If you participate both days, just do one survey form. Yeah, one survey form for the whole weekend. If you make a mistake, don't worry, I will on the other end combine them for you, but one survey for the whole weekend.
And someone wanted clarification on what exactly happens on the weekend. Like, is that when the results are shared, or do they participate that weekend?
Oh yeah. So the weekend is when you submit your data. That's when you're counting your birds. Um, we will definitely do a couple follow-up emails to kind of share some early results and some photos. But we do have a lot of paper data sheets that come in, and it takes us a while to process the data. So it will take some time to get the final tallies. But when they are available, they'll be posted on the website.
Someone is asking if it's location specific, if they should just participate at their house, or what happens if they are away that weekend.
Okay. So we recommend participating in your own backyard. If you are away, unfortunately, you can't participate outside of New Hampshire. But if you're in New Hampshire, you could adopt a backyard, and we actually account for that on the survey form. We'll ask for the address of where you watch, and then we have a checkbox for is this the same place as my home address? And in some cases, it's not, and so we'll gather that information too. So you're welcome if you can't participate in your own backyard, but you're in a different backyard in New Hampshire, welcome to participate. Just note it on your survey form.
Someone is asking just for clarification on like the backyard
Mhm.
constraint. So if they hear something far away and they're sure of the ID, can they still count it as their backyard?
If you hear something far away and you're sure of the ID, yes, as long
Um,
as you're still in your backyard.
Someone is asking if the weather is bad and birds don't appear that day, should they pick a better day?
Ah, that's tricky. And some days we do get snow. Luckily, there are 2 days, so you do have that option. You can pick the Sunday if the Saturday's bad. Keep an eye on the weather, but unfortunately, we don't change the weekend. But we have, almost 40 years of data, so some of that noise, you know, bird presence based on weather is comes out in the wash in the data essentially. And we do keep a track of weather conditions as well for the survey because that is an important factor.
We have a few questions about mealworms and what types of birds like them, as well as how to best put it out.
Okay, great. So Eastern bluebirds come to mind. They love mealworms, and that's why most people are putting out mealworms. Some people put them in little like hanging bags. There's also a real great like mealworm table out there. Um, that basically is like, well, you can look it up. It's like two pieces of wood and it's got a little dish that goes in the center. A lot of people like that because the bluebirds will go in and get the mealworm, but the starlings, which are an invasive species, won't go under the platform to get the mealworm. So eastern bluebirds are a great species that loves mealworms. They do tend to be a little pricey. So if you're just starting out, I'd recommend black oil sunflower seeds as a good starting point, and maybe a suet block. And then you can work your way up to mealworms. Um, but bluebirds love them, and so do Carolina wrens.
I'm going to also put a link to an article that Grace wrote about backyard bird feeding. It's very helpful for this too. And then we have a question about a friend who couldn't make the webinar, but they want to participate in Can They Still?
Yeah, definitely. Yep, you do not need to participate in the webinar to join the survey. All the resources are online that you need. We will post the recording too, but she doesn't need to watch it to participate.
I saw a question a little while ago about someone who has 16 acres of land and how do you recommend they handle surveying that?
Yeah, that's tricky. Some people just end up with really awesome backyards. We always have a couple waterfowl because some of our backyard bird watchers live on a river. It's in their backyard, so they report it and they get really lucky and have cool birds. We have a couple people who live on the coast too, and the same thing. Because we have so many participants, those kind of like blips in the data do kind of come out in the wash essentially. What I would suggest in this case is kind of focus on the area right around your house. What can you see from just around your house? And that I would count as your backyard.
We have another bluebird question, wondering if they can attract bluebirds without an open field.
Bluebirds without an open field. So, bluebirds do prefer that open field habitat. I do know some people who have bluebirds if they live like in a development near an open field. But in some ways, we are limited by where we live. So if you're having trouble attracting bluebirds because you live in the wrong habitat, I think about some other birds that you can attract. There's some pretty cool other species that are less dependent on that open habitat. So I think about maybe attracting woodpeckers kind of as a consolation with the suet block or something like that.
We have a question about what to do if someone goes and visits family and sees birds at their house. Can they do two different surveys?
Yep, you can do two different surveys as long as there are two different locations and get your friends and family to do it too.
I think the questions are slowing down. Anybody else can feel free to add some, but it's almost time for us to wrap it up.
With I see a question about starlings. That new mealworm feeder I was talking about, which has the two boards and the cup in the middle, is really effective. Another thing people do is put up multiple feeders. So feed the starlings, but also have an opportunity to feed other things too. So those are my top two recommendations. And also, we still count starlings, so if you see them, please still add them to your survey form. Yep, and again, yeah, one survey form for the whole weekend. And you'll see when you get in there, it's pretty clear. You can check both days that you watch the birds. Thank you so much. Let me see if I see anything else. We had a lot of questions about what to feed birds, which is exciting. People are getting ready. Yeah, and I see a question about dried too. Most people buy dried mealworms. They're much easier to handle. We do have a couple of volunteers who are very dedicated and will like rear them in their house. I'm not that dedicated, so I'm not going to do that, but feel free to if you want to.
Someone just asked, when is the survey again? It's the weekend of the 14th and 15th.
Yeah, weekend of the 14th and 15th. And sometimes it's been helping me to say Valentine's Day weekend, so don't forget.
And I just put the website in the chat again so people can see that it has the date up there and all the information you need. We
Oh,
had
great.
one more question about how to count the times. If they watch 2 to 3 minutes a dozen times a day, how do they count the time?
2 to 3 minutes a dozen times a day. Well, let's do just estimate. So do 3 times 12 and 35, 36 minutes. Doesn't have to be an exact science, just a good estimate. Yeah. Can you email all the questions and answers that were submitted by chance? It would be great to refer. So we have a great FAQ on our website, but if I see anything that isn't on the website, I'll put it in the follow-up email for you guys. That's a great point. And we have some great advice from Chris too, who put feed stores like poultry stores have much less expensive dried mealworms. That's a great tip. When I had chickens, that's where I got mine, and they were a lot cheaper. Um, see if there's anything else. Oh, I like that question, Elsa. We definitely are feeding bluebirds more than we used to, and I think I talked a little bit about landscaping, and how more fruit trees could be a cause for more bluebirds. What we're feeding them is also improved, so more real worms as well. That's an interesting point. And I see, why doesn't the survey take place on a weekday? I think the idea behind a weekend is so that the most people possible can participate. We have a lot of kids who join in the survey, and families. So I think that was the original idea, but it did start before I was born. So I'm not sure I can verify that with anyone. But that would be my theory. Okay, so are you seeing anything else?
We did get one more question about bluebirds. Would a bluebird eat from a suet block made mostly of mealworms and lard?
Yeah, I've seen bluebirds eat from suet blocks. I'm not going to promise that it will, because I can't guarantee bluebirds, but there's a good chance. Yeah, I see that note, Elsa. My count of birds is way down this winter. We've had some people reporting the same thing, so it'll be interesting to see if that comes out in the data. I'll be very curious to see. Numbers low in Nashua here too. Okay. Well, you guys have my email address, and I will send a post email too, probably on Monday, just with any other tips and a link to the recorded webinar. But in the meantime, feel free to explore the website, get ready for your survey. I see some good notes in the chat about um, different food that people are planning to put out. And most importantly, don't forget to participate on Valentine's Day weekend, February 14th and 15th. Thank you so much. And I hope you have a great evening. Take care. I'll stay on for a few more minutes, but have a nice evening and good luck. Hopefully, there'll be lots of great birds at your feeders.